Hi, Mike Trout here, and I want to give you a talk to why I believe and explain to you why Ethereum is basically the walking dead. Now, I'll give you some backstory of this if you are unaware of all this, but basically on June 20th, there was a hack. And it was a hack that stole about $50 million equivalent in cryptocurrency called Ethereum. And ultimately, they decided to do, in essence, not technically, but in essence, think of it, the best way to think of it is a rollback to when the crime happened, right? At an earlier part of the blockchain. And then create a duplicate of that chain, so the original one has the crime and the new one doesn't have the hack, right? And understand that this hack was a result of bad coding on the behalf of the DAO. They just didn't, they didn't test the code, and ultimately, in my view, as a former gamer, if a game allows me to do something, then I believe that's the laws of the physics. If I'm physically going into the game and changing things, right, by adding code, then that's hacking. But if I can legitimately do something based on the parameters of the code that were provided to me, and it provides me a windfall, then that's the physics of the code, and I am just playing by those rules of physics. Does that make sense? So the moment I, add something, that's a hack. If I'm just using the physics of the code, and that's what the hacker did. So ultimately, he stole a lot of money, not really that much in the scheme of things, from a bunch of rich people who didn't like the idea of losing that money. So what they did was, they did this, was known as a hard fork, and created two versions of Ethereum. The original version, they renamed Classic, the unforked one, right? And the new one, they renamed Ethereum. So think of it this way: the original one, in a way, is the legitimate one. It has not been forked. It's going by the rules that they set forth of when they created Ethereum. And the new one is a centralized, or hierarchical blockchain that has the interests of a few at heart, and they made a centralized decision. And I have a talk here you can listen to where I explain it to the NASDAQ. So back to my point, why do I think Ethereum is walking dead? Well, let me use an example of an analogy. In 1995, a company called Encarta, and if you're old like me, you'll remember Encarta. I was young at the time, 1995. And Encarta was an online encyclopedia developed by Microsoft, heavily funded, tens of millions, and they were going after Encyclopedia Britannica's market. They were going to disrupt their market, and Encyclopedia Britannica was very, very resistant to going to online. It was against their culture, their ideas, and everything else, and they had a very old board that was like, no, we're not going to this newfangled thing called the internet. So Microsoft set their eyes on that. In 2000, another company launched, and they headed by a guy called Jimmy. And Jimmy had this idea of this kind of free-forming encyclopedia that anyone could write and participate. Now, he went to Silicon Valley, Jimmy did, and he goes to a bunch of investors and say, hey, look at my idea. This is this decentralized encyclopedia on the web that ultimately, anyone can participate and write. And everyone looked at him and laughed and said, Jimmy, you know who you're up against? Just the most powerful company in the world is called Microsoft. And not only that, they've been around for 5 years, and they've got all this content, and they're spending tens of millions of dollars. Dude, go back to Tampa, pull out a surfboard, whatever, margarita, whatever, and relax, and don't waste your time with this crazy idea called Wikipedia? Wiki? What's a wiki, right? Well, we all know the story. Now, what you don't know is that Encarta lived on till 2011 and finally closed their doors in 2011. I have no idea what they were doing, but in 2011 they finally shut down, and you can verify all this on Wikipedia. Now, how does this relate to Ethereum and Ethereum Classic? All right, well, it's simple. The moment they created the fork, right, prior to the fork, they were Encarta. And the moment they forked, they just introduced Wikipedia. Ethereum Classic is the rightful heir. There's really nothing they can do to stop it. A bunch of miners, and some of them are coming over, like Chandler, the guy who said he was going to attack, Classic. He was the one behind the attacks on Classic, trying to destroy it. He pretty much admitted he was following orders by Vitalik. If you listen to his video, I was wrong to support Vitalik and the fork, right? So, and here's a guy who attacked Classic and saying he supported. So there is correlation there of a cartel or an organization, which I'm the only one on the planet pretty much out there exposing, and I feel like I'm the guy from the Prison Planet. What the heck's his name? Explaining what's going on, and basically it's a matter of time. Now, I don't know if it's going to take 3 years. I don't know if it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, but Ethereum is dead. Now, I think they know that, and I think the simple fact that the Ethereum has kind of rolled down to like $10 from like 14 or 12, the simple fact that the DAO, everyone basically pulled their money out of the DAO, and that has tanked, are some of the symptoms that I'm talking about. And ultimately, as long as Ethereum Classic exists as it does, then there is no hope for Ethereum. Now, here's where I come in, and I would say the Foundup play. Now, I am looking to launch Foundups on Ethereum Classic, but only if I get what's known as a consensus behind it, which means as long as I can collect the majority of the ETC in exchange for our token ups, which then allows me to pivot ETC in the sense of not change the fundamentals of ETC that are laid out in the Article of Independence that was probably written by Charles and his group. And the only thing we would change is, number one, is the brand. We would change it from ETC to Core, C-O-R-E, Core. And ultimately, we would also introduce an autonomous noodle that would run ETC entirely, removing the need of a foundation or organization or head for ETC, and truly turn ETC or Ethereum Classic into a true autonomous agent. And the agent that would run it would be a cross between a Siri and the Google algorithm in many respects. Best way for you to kind of wrap your mind around it. And it is the I call it the noodle. You can read my white paper that ultimately is a rewrite from my 2011 business plan that's up there too, applying the new terms of Ethereum that they brought to the table. I'm the guy who met with Vitalik's best friend over a course of weeks, explaining what I call the Open Innovation Framework, OIF. Back then it was called the Open Startup Innovation Framework, until I made the connection of the startup business model in every crisis, and I was like, let's just remove startup because Foundup is its own thing, plus the idea of a Foundup existing on the blockchain is very different, and I have a diagram that you can look, and that's a 2011 diagram which I call the Foundups blockchain. I didn't call it that back then, but that's what it was. I didn't really know what a blockchain was. I didn't know these things, but I was designing a framework that needed the blockchain in order to happen. I have a very, very, very specific vision and direction for Ethereum Classic. Whether those who are the leaders of that wish to adopt it, that's their decision, but it's not going to stop Foundups. And here's why: because ultimately we will have the money to launch Foundups. If we can't launch it on Ethereum, then I will just sit back and watch ETC destroy Ethereum, which is going to happen. If we do get consensus and the leadership gets behind, now understand, I have no desire to lead core. I have no desire to be the voice, to be the Vitalik of ETC. I have no desire to play that role. I have one selfish desire, and it's a selfish desire because it has a selfless outcome. And that incredibly selfish desire, which I've been on since 2009 when I started this journey on Foundups, is to bring Foundups into reality. And what will Foundups do? Let me explain to you. Foundups basically uses the blockchain to create one global incubator. There isn't multiple ones. It disrupts all of the Techstars, the Y Combinators. Any closed, centralized, top-down in the incubator becomes disrupted with Foundups. It also creates a decentralized hedge fund, which you can call the DAO. Now, it's going to work very different than the DAO. The DAO, how they're working it, isn't how I see the DAO working. The DAO would work more like, think of it like an IRA, where there would be shares and stuff like that, but the ability to go in and take out your money, there would be penalties and everything else to do that. And ultimately, all the capital gain and net profits based on the smart contracts on how the Foundup is set up will return to this DAO and subsequent child DAO of those that were involved. So let me explain that. So basically what I'm saying is this: is let's say you were in part of Google and Google launched as a Foundup and you put $1 in it. $1 today, it would be worth $300 million, right? Well, you take out let's say the smart contract for Google was an 80% return. So 80% of 300,000 would go into a child DAO, which you would administrate. All of a sudden, you become what's known as an archangel because you put that $1 in, and that dollar with the splitting and everything else now is worth 300,000. All of a sudden, you have a special DAO. Now, you can't spend this money. You can't run and buy an island like these investors do in Google and everything else. You can't. What you can do with this money is seed other Foundups. And there will be so many Foundups. You'll be like, how can I see them all? Well, don't worry, because the Noodle core, you can type a button, basically says, it's called distributive crowdfunding, another invention of mine back from 2011 that we'll implement. Distributive crowdfunding, basically you click a button and everything gets distributed out to all the Foundups based on your liking parameters. The Noodle will know, just like Google algorithm knows what ads may be of interest to you, the Noodle knows what Foundups you would be interested in investing in. And there's a lot more to Foundups than this. But we create a global cooperative. We bring all the cooperatives together. And we empower people. There's millions of people out there that want to help save the planet, and yet they're not empowered to. Our system does not allow it. Our system basically wants you to be enslaved in a job. They want you to be enslaved in debt. It's all about centralized control of you as an individual. Foundup changes all of that. I'm more than happy to talk about Foundups in greater detail. You can Skype me at Foundup. You can join our Trello. And more importantly, you can talk and share your vision for a beautiful planet on UnDevCon. UnDevCon is the antithesis to DevCon 2. So you can go to UnDevCon and you can sign up. You can connect with me. I'm looking for people to kick off UnDevCon in their country. We run on Holacracy. UnDevCon is a self-organizing entity. It is what you make of it. It is an unconference that is going to talk about how the blockchain is going to change everything. You have to understand what Nikola Tesla invented with AC/DC. The blockchain is 1,000 times more profound and going to impact your lives in ways you and I can't even imagine. It is a new paradigm that we can't even see through. It is that big. But it's very important, and this is what's so important about ETC and why I love ETC so much, is ETC has lost the special interest control. Ethereum has the special interest control. ETC does not. And if, as a global community, we can turn ETC into a true autonomous organization, then we can change the business model that powers, that Noam Chomsky talks about, powers wealth and power, by changing the fuel that powers wealth and power. That fuel is the ecocentric startup business model. Foundups is the fuel that powers our, what I would say, our equality and justice in the world. It is the fuel that solves all of the problems in the world. It is the fuel that empowers you, me, and everyone else to take action. And instead of complaining like Legion, instead of complaining like Anon, to actually take action to fix these things. And that's because, and that's why I have this simple little video to try to explain how Beach Boy Anon, Anon's dad, who left to live on the beach and retire, comes back and saying, what the heck's happening? Why am I getting all this trash on the beach? Do they not have garbage cans? And then sets off to save the beaches, which he does in my little video. I hope you enjoy. My name is Mike Trout. I'm just trying to do the right thing. I have no interest in becoming a billionaire or becoming rich or anything else. You can join my crowdfunding campaign. You'll notice I have a few folks that really, really support and believe in what I'm doing. And you should follow their lead, because what I am doing is extremely important for you, your family, your children's children. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.